Hello, hello, everybody. If I can ask everybody to just put themselves on mute, we'll just take a moment here to continue to allow everybody into the waiting room before we jump off here with Nicholas Pearson. What an honor to be sitting with all of you and to have this conversation here. And sorry for the last minute change there, Facebook Live. Yet again, I'm still confused as how it works. It always seems to be a bit of a dodgy thing for me. So my apologies on that, everybody. And here we are anyways, and very much looking forward to this conversation. Okay. All right, so I want to start it off by just saying, of course, my name is Bruce Taylor. I'm the admin of the Usui Reiki Ryoho support and community group. I've been working with Reiki now since 2006, trained in many different lineages, but the kind of base of my practice is Usui Reiki Ryoho and kind of the Japanese lineage. And I'm so happy and so honored to be talking with you today, Nicholas, about this. And in this conversation today, we're going to be diving into not only the ideas behind the different lineages of Reiki and kind of bridging those gaps, but we're also going to be looking at how we can then take everything that Nicholas is going to share with us today and bring that into our practice as a whole. So a beautiful conversation that we have coming up here. Everybody forgive me as I continue to let people in from the waiting room. So if you see me darting back or my sentences get interrupted, I'm just doing some admin things on my side as well. A very quick introduction of Nicholas, and then I'm going to hand it over to him for the conversation. So Nicholas Pearson is an award-winning author and Reiki teacher. He is trained in traditional styles of Japanese Reiki, including Usui Reiki Ryoho, Jikiden Reiki, Komyo ReikiDo, as well as traditional and non-traditional forms of Western Reiki, like Usui Reiki Ryoho and Usui Tibetan Reiki. Nicholas strives to offer Reiki trainings, practice sessions, and other events that unique practitioners of all lineages by helping us understanding how and where Reiki developed and where it can take us. He's also a certified medical Reiki master and a member of the International Association of Reiki Professionals. His seminal Reiki book, which I highly recommend that everybody grabs a copy of, by the way, Foundations of Reiki Ryoho, is available in English and Italian. Nicholas is also the author of Crystal Basics and 5 other books. And he also offers trainings in crystal healing, flower essence therapy, and other esoteric topics across the United States and abroad. And so with that, it is my sincere honor, Nicholas, I turn the platform over to you, and what a joy it is to be able to speak with you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you everyone who's here or who's going to catch the replay. It is a delight to be able to share some enthusiasm for Reiki with you all. And I think it might be helpful just to kind of talk a little bit about my journey with the system of Reiki and how my perspective has just kind of grown and been shaped by experiencing it through lots of different lenses. So I also began my Reiki journey in the year 2006. And my very first Reiki seminar was in southeastern Florida, very close to my hometown. And my first teacher was on track to become, but not quite there yet, a licensed teacher through the International Center for Reiki Training.
Needham one is my main
One
address.
second.
Keep yourselves muted.
I can change it to the Lexington one if it's going to be. I gave the.
One second. Can I ask everybody to just mute, please?
I can do the.
There we are. All right. Sorry about that. I'll keep an eye on that as well.
Okay. Absolutely. I know things happen online.
Yeah.
So I began in 2006 with a teacher who was really involved with the International Center for Reiki Training. That's William Lee Rand's organization. And so she taught the Usui Tibetan style of Reiki that was being promoted by the organization at the time. In spite of that, though, she herself is half Japanese, was born in Okinawa, and did a lot of work above and beyond the core curriculum that was required in those classes to instill within us a profound love for and appreciation of the culture, the country, the language of Japan. And so that really kind of took root in my practice from the very beginning. I remember very eagerly as a teenager, learning to pronounce the Reiki precepts, the Gokai in Japanese, and then wanting to go on to learn how to write them. So I wrote them phonetically, and then eventually got to the point where I can scribble them very terribly in Japanese. And began to dissect the etymology of it and use it as a platform for starting to learn the language, which these days I don't speak very conversationally, but I've got a lot of useless vocab words that don't help me in everyday tourism life. But drop me at a temple and I can probably read some signage to you. And from there, I spent about maybe 3 or 4 years with just first and second degree training before I wanted to go any farther. And then I had the chance to take what she termed advanced Reiki training, which is kind of like 3A, or the first part of the third degree. And it was in Japan in 2009 that I received initiation into proper, just Western style Reiki, Usui Reiki Ryoho, in a temple in Inarito, Tokyo, at a international Reiki community kind of meetup. They did these monthly Reiki shares, and the teacher there had been practicing for a long time. She herself was a native Texan, but had spent more than half her life in Japan, and knew that I was going to continue my training.
I'm sorry, you're a student.
Yeah, I am.
Sorry,
Started at 2.
one
Okay,
second.
what were we gonna say?
Okay.
I knew that I was
sorry.
going to be, that's okay. Knew that I'd be continuing my training when I went back to meet with my teacher, Patricia Sensei, that offered me initiation into the third degree and gave me a manual. So at least I had something to go on, and just said, okay, yeah, basically here's what we do for initiations. Now you know how to do them. Go out into the world. So that was just a few days after my first time on Mount Kurama. The very first time I ever practiced giving a Reiki initiation was at Saihoji Temple, where Usui's memorial stone is. So it was this really profound experience. I don't think as a early 20-something, I really knew how much that was going to shape what I do with my life, with my practice. And ever since then, I knew that the way I learned wasn't the whole story. It was a beautiful story. It was effective. At the end of the day, the practice is the most important bit. The philosophy, the history, all of that is really secondary to what we actually engage with. But I'm a history nerd, so I like that stuff. So I immersed myself in pretty much any aspect, any avenue that I could get my hands on related to the system of Reiki. So lots of independent study, not just of Reiki history and traditions, but also of Japanese culture and language and history, to see how they all kind of fit together. I've been continuing that, and will continue to do that these days. It's a lot of academic reading, and hopefully some academic writing in the near future. I've been blessed to have the experience of studying Jikiden Reiki several times, including with the vice representative of the Institute, one of the most influential authors in the Reiki world, that's Frank Arjava-Petter. I've also taken training with Hyakuten Inamoto Sensei, and Hyakuten Sensei is just this beautiful soul, who's so humble and so passionate. And I know, Bruce, you've also studied with him.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Komyo ReikiDo certainly fills in some gaps. My teacher, Patricia, from when I took first degree to, was initiated and certified, I guess we'd say, as a teacher, also studied with Hyakuten Sensei, with Doi Hiroshi, with Gendai Reiki Home. Although she had a certain curriculum she had to adhere to with the form of practice that she was offering a certification, and there was so much extra. So I learned a lot by secondhand, we'll say, experience with some other traditions of Reiki, both in and out of Japan. So it's been a lot of fun looking at how practices have evolved. We see common threads in all of these systems. There are lots of course, really big claims made by some systems as to which is more historically accurate or authentic or the least changed. And the truth is that the nature of humanity has changed, the nature of the world has changed. They've all changed. Reiki, exactly as Usui practiced it, doesn't exist on the face of the earth because he's not here anymore. And we can't know precisely what his methodology is. There are lineages there that do the best to preserve what they can, but even they've adapted. So I really find myself most intrigued by, most interested in being of service among different lineages to find our kind of common points. And lineage serves me just to help us understand what language we're speaking, not just in terms of like English or Japanese, but the terminology, the philosophies that we use to kind of contextualize our praxis, they all come from a common point of origin. So if we can understand how things shifted slowly over time, it shows us where we've gotten to this point, how we've gotten to this point, and also where it's going to take us in the future. So a big thing that I like to do is remind us of that shared lineage, that shared tradition, and help us have the tools required to do that kind of outreach. So these days I do work with, I've done work with a few not-for-profits, medical Reiki with Raven Keys. I'm a big fan of hers and have received training in that, which is super non-traditional, but very effective. I'm on the board of directors with the Shelter Animal Reiki Association. I'm their unofficial scholar and historian. So I'm there to, offer some perspective and counterpoint from time to time. For a while, I was doing work with the national National Certification for Reiki and Healthcare Initiative, which dissolved right at the onset of the pandemic because resources in healthcare weren't really available to do that kind of work. So I'm hoping one day we pick that up again. But the beautiful thing about all of these ventures is that they are interlineage ventures. There are certainly dominant themes or narratives, but they've been spaces where we can all kind of come together. And so that's really what I aim for. And it was one of the motivating factors in the research behind the book, Foundations of Reiki Ryoho. One of my end goals was to have a working manual I could use for my classes, but I also wanted it to have perspectives that maybe differed from what I initially learned or offered more context than I can fit into a class. So there are techniques in there that are uniquely Western. There are techniques in there that are almost entirely forgotten, except in very small enclaves that are now being reintroduced to the world. So that's kind of like what my mission in life is.
I really like that point that you're making there about the common language within Reiki. I mean, we can find that maybe we're speaking in different verbiage, but if we strip all of that away, then we get back to the core essence of Reiki, which is sitting with that energy of the universe, right? And sitting in that space. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing to help strip away some of the kind of maybe the hierarchical or egotistical or differentiated beliefs, like you said at the beginning, Nicholas, I think so poignantly, this style is making some maybe grandiose claims, this one's making claims, this symbol is that symbol, this, whatever. If we strip all of that away, like you're saying here in these multimodality enclaves, there's a real beauty to the simplicity of Reiki, I guess is what I'm trying to get at here. If we strip away all of these kind of ideas, and we are simply there with the energy of that. And maybe you can speak to that or share your thoughts.
For sure. I think it is helpful maybe, I'm sure everyone catching this live or in the replay has a familiarity with the system. The practice has their own way of maybe translating the terms involved. But if we really want to kind of give us context into the work you're alluding to and the simplicity thereof, we really have to go back to the origin. We have to go back to the words themselves. And there is so much to unpack in 2 syllables, in a handful of brush strokes, that we can't do with a cute little soundbite or group of buzzwords. Like, we try because we need language that lands, that communicates, that illustrates something, but all of it kind of falls short. So if we really want to look at what the practice of Reiki is and what the phenomenon that drives the practice, because when we say Reiki in the West, we mean 2 things. We mean the formal system, whatever that looks like for us, depending on our personal history and training and lineage. But then we're also talking about the force, the energy, the phenomenon. These days, I move farther and farther away from the word energy because there are some interesting laws of physics that we don't seem to adhere to in the system of Reiki, which we can maybe come back to as well. But trying to unpack the words Rei and Ki as just universal energy, universal life force, spiritually guided life force, soul power, the nature of the universe, all of these are, they're flat because the nature of the language is so complex, is so nuanced, has so much to it. Even a Japanese person just hearing the word "de" or the word "ki" isn't going to know exactly what we mean until we see it written down or describe it, or maybe draw it in the air as we go, which is a subtle cue people will use sometimes in conversational language. The Japanese language, without the importation of loan words from other languages, only makes about 110 syllables. In English, we have somewhere between 10 and 20,000 possible combinations of sounds that produce unique syllables. So that's a really big difference there. And so there's a lot of nuance that we don't get in English, and a lot of nuance that we don't get until we write it and look into what that means in Japanese. So if we really want to understand the simplicity of it, we have to start with the complexity of it, and then we have to demystify that.
Right.
And that's a very Japanese way to go. In the West, when the system was brought here, it was initially taught as this very simple set of procedures. And then the ideology behind it has gotten successively more complicated with every iteration and every generation as we try to fill in the gaps that we don't get because of the cultural differences, because of that, the narrative of the origin of Reiki itself has had to change and adapt and be embellished to make it spreadable and transmissible in other cultures. So really, a lot of the work that I do is unpacking that really oxymoronical nature of Reiki being so complex and so simple at the same time. It is so simple, anyone can do it, but it's also so big that it is literally the energy of the whole cosmos in our hearts, in our hands, in our space, and nowhere at the same time.
Right.
Hyakuten Inamoto likes to describe Reiki in Buddhist terms as beyond the world of the pair of opposites. So as long as we have to use relative language, relative symbols or methodologies, we can't fully comprehend Reiki. Reiki itself, the phenomenon, is the experience of non-duality.
Right.
Reiki, the system, Usui Reiki Ryoho, is a set of tools that can predispose us to having that experience of non-duality. Nothing can make us go there. I mean, unless we're prepared to do as Usui did and fast on a mountain until we reach enlightenment or death, chances are we aren't willing to do that. We don't have access to the resources to do that. So we have to use the tools he gave us, the Gokai, the hands-on healing, receiving Reiju, maybe chanting or using symbols and mantras and other things. And if we do those, if we engage with them, as complex as some of those outer world tools might see, they're really there to point us toward the fundamental, very simple truth. We're all one. There's only one of us here. We are the universe, as he put it. Uchu warisoku chu. I exist in the universe, and the universe exists in me. And until we have that fundamental experience, we're always just grasping. So some of us, I think, grasp a little harder or more technically minded than others. But ultimately, we're all just kind of headed in the same direction, trying to get to that space of non-duality. So when we strip off the fluff, when we strip off maybe the baggage of misunderstanding, when we find our common connections, the common themes and elements that all systems and forms and styles of practice share, that gets us to a space where we can help each other, lift one another up towards that experience of non-duality.
And they all converge, right? And they converge. I love this idea of the convergence into nothingness. Like you said, I mean, how can you put words onto something that has no words? How can you put form to something that's formless? And if we are existing within the world of duality, like Inamoto Sensei is talking about here, well, how can we explain something uniquely external to the world within which all of our existence is framed? It's very difficult. And I wonder if you can speak. I'm just going to hold your book up here again for everybody maybe who has joined. But as I do, I wonder if you can speak to perhaps the deeper meaning of Reiki, of the symbol of Reiki as you talk about it in your book, if you wouldn't mind, or perhaps Zui Un, for instance. Some of the kind of the deeper, it gives me goosebumps to even think about it, because there's this, we just see the word Reiki, but if we start to dive into its meaning, then all of a sudden a bigger story unfolds. And if we go and we can kind of see past that, then an even grander story, like you're alluding to here, unfolds. So once again, here is Nicholas's book, The Foundations of Reiki Ryoho. It's a fantastic book, and I would highly recommend everybody to pick up a copy, regardless of where you are on your Reiki journey. It is an amazing book, and I really can't recommend it highly enough. So perhaps if you can speak to some of those points.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say like a little etymology of the term. So, here we've got the word rei. It's the rei and ki in the system. So rei is a really complex character. It's composed of several different parts and pieces, each which have even smaller parts and pieces, but there are three distinct parts. So that top bit is literally in Japanese the radical or root word for rain. So it implies that there is some sort of uppermost level to the cosmos, this highest point from which all things emanate. And then we have a mass underneath it and little raindrops. So we're implying some sort of descending quality, something that is emerging, perhaps could be another way to describe that, from that higher plane. So it's not literal rain we're talking about. This is what we call an ideograph versus a pictograph. It's not literally depicting something. You can't like go into the cosmos and just point at something and go, oh, that's Ray over there. We have to stitch together symbolic bits of meaning to kind of describe it. Now the middle part, we've got 3 of these little boxes. Now one box by itself, if we wrote it, full size, seems like this character, we have the word kuchi, which means mouth. In this case, 3 of them can imply repetition. We're using our mouth multiple times, but it can also be kind of like a contraction for a more complicated character, the vessel, the character that means vessel or utsua. So there has to be a container that receives this divine force or blessing. Poetically, that's our body. Now beneath it, this bottom part, if we look in modern day Japanese, there's really only one instance in which it's used, and it's in a compound word, and that's the word miko, which is a title given to certain types of attendants at Shinto shrines, traditionally female. Historically, they occupied a very kind of shamanistic role in Japanese culture, and in fact, the word, the mi in miko, ko means woman. This word is pronounced wu in Chinese and just meant shaman, kind of generally speaking.
Mhm.
And it's made out of this little character here is a person, and we have another little person, and then we have this sort of dividing character. It's based on, originally it was a pictograph of someone's robe, so the shamanic robe someone wore, but now it's made out of parts that is earth, person, and person. So we're kind of crossing beyond this threshold. We're leaving behind ordinary reality to go into the non-ordinary space, which I think poetically describes what we do in the shamanistic arcs. We have to be the intermediary. And we only achieve that by emptying ourselves of things to become the empty vessel, to receive whatever that spiritual blessing, whatever that rain is going to be. And so if we kind of stitch all this together, the word Rei historically has meant a lot of things. It has meant soul, spirit, ghost, ancestor, lots of supernatural kinds of things too that go bump in the night. But Rei has also taken on the quality of shining, intelligent, bright, effective, miraculous, mysterious, numinous, inexplicable. If we take the word as it's written in modern day Japanese, Rei and Ki, which we haven't gotten to yet, but Reiki, it means like an ambience, mysterious quality that you find in a place. So Reiki is this phenomenon that we experience that there really isn't another word for. And that's why we don't try to translate it really. Ki is much simpler, and it sounds really mystical when we first break it down, but it is such an ordinary idea in everyday Japanese. So we've got this little asterisk looking thing as a rice plant. And then we have steam rising from a lidded cooking vessel. So once upon a time, these were written as kind of like wavy lines, and they looked a lot more like vapor. So rice, of course, is the staple of the diet. It symbolizes fuel, but we're not talking literal metabolic fuel energy that we get from the food we ingest. We're talking about something as intangible as vapor, something you can't quite put your fingers on. So this is that kind of more woo-woo energy, except that the word ki in Japanese is so commonplace that they don't think of it as being super mystical unless you connect it to a word like Rei. If you want to ask someone how they're doing, you'll say, "O genki desu ka?" Is your ki in its original state, just as the gods created it?
Mhm.
That's a really deep way to say hi.
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit.
And the average Japanese person isn't going to break that down and go, genki desu ka? What does that literally mean? Just like we don't go, every time we say goodbye, it's God be with you. We don't stop and contemplate that. It's just what it means now. If we talk about weather, we talk about ten ki, literally the ki of the heavens. If we want to talk about popularity, it's nin ki, the ki or the energy of people. If we talk about magnetism, it's magnetic ki. And it's such an ordinary idea, but there are these kind of nuanced expressions of ki. When I wrote the book, I was kind of using a model that was, we'll say, adapted, translated to appeal to a Western mind, to be accessible to a Western mind. And it looks very hierarchical if you look at these different kinds or different expressions of ki. And rather than think of them as higher or lower, more powerful, less powerful, we'll think of them as more specialized and more universal, more cosmic. And Lei is kind of at that outermost level. It encompasses and envelops all the others, but there's still a layer just outside of it in Japanese cosmology, and it's Shinki, the key of the divine, the key of Kami. The word Shin or Kami means a lot of the same things that Rei means, but then also a few more, usually implying some sort of numinous force, a deity perhaps. When we look at Reiki, if it is the sort of intermediary, if it stands in between all these other kinds of ki that are readily accessible to us and this really out there kind of force, even the word Reiki is the intermediary between the celestial and the terrestrial. Just like in the system of Reiki, we become those mediators totally passively, that links heaven and earth together. And I think that's why Hyakuten Inamoto is fond of the expression ten rei chi ki. So in this case, we're going to interpret both rei and ki to mean energy or essence or the nature of something, because they both mean those things. And then ten is heaven and chi is earth. So Reiki, therefore, if we derive it from this expression, which may not be, we'll say 100% historically accurate, but is an alignment with Japanese thought. Tenrei, the energy of the heavens, Shiki, the energy of the earth. So when we talk about Reiki as universal life force or universal energy, it's not just this thing that we see as being universal in nature, but it's literally the fabric of the whole universe. And heaven and earth together equate to the universe, because sometimes, especially in our modern day perspective, when we talk about the universe, we look up there, like that's the universe out there. But like, this is the universe.
Right.
This is the universe all around me. And Reiki is the realization that those things are not separate. To use like Western esoteric terms, when Usui is talking about I exist in the universe and the universe exists in me, or Hyakuten Sensei is saying Tenrei Chiki, the energy of the heavens and the earth, it's the same thing as saying as above, so below. Right. It's that hermetic principle of correspondence. And achieving any of these things, more than just at the intellectual level, yields that experience of non-duality.
And this is a very common tenet in Buddhism as well, isn't it? Is to see, for instance, my computer is sitting on a chair. And if I am viewing the chair as a chair, then I'm objectifying it. But if I recognize that the chair is part of me, and then we start to make an entirely new conversation about that, right? Then I wouldn't treat the chair as a chair. I would treat the chair as an extension of myself. Like you said, the universe is everywhere here. Right. So if we can start to see that, then all of a sudden, where is the duality? Right. That starts to strip away relatively, hopefully anyways, relatively quickly. I mean, it's very difficult to feel that kind of fracturing in that space. But, indeed, that's a very beautiful concept of as soon as we're objectifying something or viewing that there's a separation, then we're creating that suffering of that separation. And Reiki is helping to bring that gap of that separation perhaps a little bit closer, or hopefully to dissolve it entirely, right?
For sure. And ultimately it's imminently practical as well. And I can give us a very simple example that if we're all Reiki practitioners, or even if we've just ever received Reiki, we've probably already had this very simple, fundamental, universal Reiki experience. We lay hands on someone else to practice Reiki, or someone else lays hands on us. And if I'm practicing Reiki for the benefit of another sentient being, I'm receiving the same benefit. We depict it, we rationalize it as an external force that flows through us. There are challenges with that kind of rationalization that also kind of defy the physics of what's really going on, so far as we can demonstrate at this point. But it's working on us no less than it's working on the target or the object. And when we really have the experience that it is the same thing, laying hands on someone else, laying hands on me, no difference, no separation. From the universe's perspective, the net amount of suffering is decreasing, the net amount of wholeness is increasing. This perspective even kind of runs into like, if you learn very Japanese style Reiki from a Japanese person, and as a Westerner who's trained in other styles of Reiki, you go and you're learning the second degree. We learn the third symbol for doing remote treatments. You go, well, what about getting permission? This question doesn't make sense, because from this perspective, from this kind of cultural context, there is no separation anyway. I don't have to ask you permission to lay hands on me. So why do I ask you permission to send Reiki to you? Because we're all one. there is no real kind of physical distance notwithstanding, there is no separation between our souls, because we're all just this one bit of the universe experiencing itself in myriad ways. So we run into the kind of challenge of the very fundamentally Japanese worldview, and then a kind of broadly speaking Western one, and how they don't always kind of come from the same perspective. And so we compromise and say, well, of course, ask permission. If it's an emergent situation, do it anyway. Hope that it's going to land. And you know what, from the soul's perspective, if we're not really doing anything, if we're not sending, forcing, directing, if all we do is sit with Reiki, then why do I need permission? Period. Now, of course, I recognize free will. I respect people as their own entities, so long as we're in material bodies. I want to abide by the rules of the material plane and of the kind of social sphere that we're all participating in by mutual agreement. But this idea that I'm unable, or that it is somehow cosmically unlawful to send Reiki without permission, is a very Western idea that probably emerged in the 1980s and not any sooner, which doesn't mean you can't abide by it. But you know, if being hung up on the dogma is going to upset the practice, then think of it the same as hands-on. If this is the same as this, maybe just do this with the hopes that it's going to help someone else, because chances are it will do just that.
Absolutely. This is a question that comes up, here, and Simona has put this into the chat as well. It's a question that comes up so often about this idea of asking permission. I'm a part of the Global Reiki Raise Summit, and I remember 2 years ago there was a gentleman in the summit, I can't remember his name now, who did an entire speech on why you have to ask permission before you send Reiki to anybody. And maybe, to play the other side of that, maybe I'm really nervous about having a Reiki session with you, and so maybe by that just kind of tacit conversation of permission puts me a little bit more at ease, and I'm able to then let go a little bit further, perhaps. And if that's the case, that's the case. But your points are very well spoken and very much needed on this. It's a conversation that I think is not talked about enough. I find myself answering it on a weekly basis, if not perhaps even more frequently. And I always wonder with these questions, distance Reiki questions, permission questions, healing questions, dark energy questions, picking up other people's energy, how quickly we can forget the fundamental basic threads of our practice. Let's take it no further than just the precepts. So all of the things that I've just listed there and what you've just spoken on with asking permission, they all evaporate in the face of the precepts. If your understanding of Reiki goes no further than just the 5 guiding precepts of Reiki, then why would you ever have to ask permission? Right?
Yeah.
And we just forget all the time. We forget these. It's very much needed, this conversation. So thank you for bringing that up. Indeed.
It's my pleasure. And I in an ever evolving culture, consent is a big deal. And if I have someone coming to me, consent is implicit, but still having those conversations can kind of work psychologically to our advantage too, even if there's no cosmic law saying Reiki's not going to work because you didn't ask permission. The idea that someone is consenting is a kind of, we'll say, a little seed we plant in the subconscious that is a signal to their mind, their body, their heart, their soul, that they want to participate, they want to be well, they want to find balance, whatever that's going to look like for them. So there absolutely is a benefit to getting permission, but it's just there's no cosmic police force out there that's going to come knock on your door and say, excuse me, there's a Reiki practitioner who hasn't been asking permission before sending distance.
Right. And further to that seed that is not only planted in the subconscious, it will start to sprout. Because I've given my consent to this session. I've put my mind at ease because you've received, or you've asked me if I'm comfortable with this, or however that context might look. And I've said yes to that. And now I surrender. And now I then surrender further to this experience that will unfold, hopefully without belief or attachment or worry about what's happening, body sensations or esoteric, experiences or what have you. If we can just flow with all of that, then we sink deeper and deeper out of the space of duality.
Yeah, that is such a great point.
Yeah.
If the goal of our practice is to one day maybe just come come close to brushing the surface or the edge of the non-dual experience, then anything we can do to bring others up with us is kind of the nature of it. I like to think of Reiki as kind of like the Bodhisattva's path, the Bodhisattva art. What we do is not just for our benefit, but you sure as hell can't help someone else if you can't also help yourself. So
Right.
if those tools like permission, consent, and everything else are widening the vehicle so more people can get on board, then let's do it.
Right. In my time with Hakutan Sensei, one of the things that I really appreciate about that is the focus on Reiki being a mind-body practice, and then looking at how the hand placements start on the head and then work down to the body to silence the mind first. And then from that space, healing will start to naturally flourish, because our body wants to be in a state of balance. It's the disharmony of the mind that can create that. Even if we're ill, we still have a story and a mental attachment to the illness, which then gets in the way of our own healing capabilities, right? And so if we can view Reiki as that mind-body practice, mind first, silence the mind, and then the body becomes still, then we can slip into that space perhaps a little bit easier.
Yeah, and it's right there in the name of the system.
Yeah.
We say Reiki as the name of the system because it's easy. The formal title listed on certificates and everywhere else, Shin Kaizen Usui Reiki Ryoho. So the first Shin is heart or mind. They're the same in Japanese, at least for the sake of argument this time. The other Shin is body. So heart, mind, then body, and then Kaizen is to improve. So it's the Usui Reiki healing method for the improvement of our heart, mind, and then our body.
Right.
Even in the little question and answer section of the booklet published by Usui's Original Society, which is purportedly in Usui's own words. This is the only primary document we have that comes from him. It's a little question and answer section called the Kokai Denju Setsume, or the explanation of open teachings. In other words, why anyone can sign up rather than it being reserved for the select few, which was typical of spiritual traditions and systems in Japan around his era. It's still kind of typical, in fact. Someone asks outright, is this Seishin Ryoho, is this a spiritual healing technique? And says, well, sure. But you can also call it physical therapy, because if the mind gets better, so does the body.
Right.
Very, I'm paraphrasing, I'm simplifying a bit. He's got very flowery language. He was very good with his words, but just very simple. Yes, of course, it's spiritual healing. It's also physical healing, because these are not separate things. Because if we're having a non-dual experience, yes, it's a mind-body practice, but whichever part we're touching, we're also touching all the other parts. Someone can come to you for an injured knee or spasms in the back, and probably the first benefit they're going to notice is not that their pain magically goes away. The first benefit almost everybody on the table is going to experience is some kind of stillness, some kind of peace, something that happens at that psychological, spiritual, emotional level before it kind of works its way down and pervades the body as well.
Absolutely. And then in that space, right, you're starting to soften the narrative, soften the story. So, maybe the knee is blown out because of a belief about the self, or a lack of courage, or whatever metaphysical thing it might be. But if that mind space is softened, we do this, ironically, we do this every night, don't we? We go to sleep, we lose the story of ourself, and we wake up more healed than we were the day before, if we had something we were working on healing. Very similar here with Reiki.
Absolutely. And so we have to practice the state of surrender.
Absolutely. Well, speaking to that, how can we, in your opinion, then kind of make our practice perhaps a little bit more practical? What are your thoughts on that? This is for anybody who is joining now, this is one of the second topics that we want to look into, is to not just bridge those gaps between all the different modalities, but also to understand how we can make our practice perhaps more practical, or perhaps more simple, or perhaps less dualistic.
I'm a big proponent of just going to your practice. So irrespective of the style or lineage and the particular maybe sequences or protocols you're going to have, engage with those as you see fit, as you've learned, as you prefer to practice them, but really just be present with the practice itself. So if I'm most interested in hands-on treatment, if that's the protocol I want to be in, just be present with hands-on treatment. And if we release this idea of attachment to outcome, I don't place hands on my body to change my physiology. I place my hands on my body because it is the practice. If I
Mhm.
do it with the intended outcome, it becomes an intervention rather than a practice. And interventions are necessary. I am a big fan of lots of interventions that save people's lives, both the mystical, the metaphysical, the psychological, the medicinal. They're all very important. But if we engage with the practice for the sake of practice, that's where things happen. So simplifying, committing to some sort of regular rhythm to it, and whatever that rhythmic structure is going to be looks different for everyone. The worst thing we can do is make someone feel bad for not practicing regularly enough, for not doing hands-on treatment every day, for not having the time or space. Instead, we want to, again, widen the vehicle so there's room for everybody. You only get a chance for Reiki once a week. That's great. Come on down. Let's be present with that practice. You can do it 4 times a day. I really envy you. Teach me your secrets. And when we can really put ourselves at ease to just be with the practice, that's when the non-dual experience is more likely to happen. The sort of core elements that all systems of Reiki share are where we start. So the big one for me that we all have agency over is the Gokai, the 5 precepts or 5 admonitions, if we translate it quite literally. So find a version of that that speaks to you and reflect on it often. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to chant it out loud, although it's there in the instructions. I have it right beside my computer so I can look at it in beautiful calligraphy by my friend Michiko-san. And at we've got this kind of double title. It says Shofuku no Hiho Manbyo no Ryaku, the secret art of inviting happiness or good fortune, the spiritual medicine of all illness, or we could even say the miraculous medicine, the wonder drug. The word Reyaku was used in Justin Stein talks about how it was used in aspirin advertisements in the 1920s and 30s Japan. So it doesn't always have this mystical connotation, but the wonder drug of everything, every suffering.
Right.
And it just goes to those five lines. Kyodake wa today only, anger not, worry not, do gratitude, be diligent in our work, show kindness to people. But then there's these little bits of instructions at the end. So where possible, I like to follow them. It says asayu gasho shite, morning and evening do gasho, kokoro ni nenji kuchi ni tanayo, hold them in your heart and say them out loud. So if you have the means to actually practice it out loud in the language of your choice, doesn't have to be Japanese. If you have a translation or a retelling of them that works for you, use them as affirmations. Find a poetic version that's got some commentary in there. Look at it, as a beautiful print on the wall. Do what you have to do to be in that headspace, because although it says kokoro ni nenji, kuchi ni tanayo, and kuchi ni is from the mouth or through the mouth, chant them. But the important bit is that he talks about the heart first. Kokoro ni nenji, bear them deeply in your heart mind. So hold them inside. And it literally says do this morning and evening, but poetically, we can look at nuance here. Japanese makes compound words very readily. So it's not just in the morning do this, in the evening do this, but from morning until evening. Live your whole life with these principles in mind. Bear them deeply in your heart. And this, for me, is the game changer. This is where the real experience happens. All the other core elements of the system of Reiki are aimed at helping us achieve what the Gokai readily reveals to us. I think the Gokai is the highest expression of the system of Reiki. It has all of the instructions we need to really practice Reiki as a spiritual art. And you notice nowhere in there does it say morning and evening, do hands-on practice. Morning and evening, you should give or receive Reiju. Morning and evening, you should chant the mantras or draw the symbols or do any of these other things. All of those are tools to help us do what the Gokai is already helping us do. So that line, when we give it this more nuanced interpretation, reminds me a lot of a quote from St. Francis of Assisi, which I'm going to butcher, so forgive my paraphrase, but he says, go into the world and preach the gospel, but only if necessary use words. So
yeah, perfect.
Go into the world from morning and evening and live the Gokai. Only if necessary do say them out loud.
Right.
That's what this is about for me, and that's where we have that experience. And everything else is subsidiary to that. Because we are perfectly imperfect beings, we can't be imperfect unless we view the world as dual. So, I have to contradict myself here because I'm living in a dual world. I'm living this relative experience. But if we are these imperfect beings, if we are all aiming towards this state, then we require tools to get us there. And unless we're willing to go die on the mountain, like Usui was, chances are we should work with a set of tools that came from someone who already navigated that path and gave us something that is actionable, that is attainable. You can do it, and you don't have to work too hard to do it, or at least it is simple, if not easy. And then we know it works. It's demonstrable. And Reiki is all of those things, whether it's reciting the Gokai, practicing hands-on healing, using the symbols and mantras, giving and receiving Reiju, kind of going through the progressive degrees if we are called to with the system of Reiki in terms of learning it. And then also practicing everything for the goal of self-actualization, personal development. All of these things are interrelated. We can't touch one without touching the rest. So if we want to make all of this actionable, like what can we do to simplify our practice? Show up for your practice. It's going to get boring sometimes sitting there. It's allowed to be. No one said enlightenment was a roller coaster ride. Real life is a roller coaster ride. I don't need more of that. I'm okay with stillness and quietude. So that's what it's about. It's not necessarily there's a single action all of us have to take. It's the mindset we use with the tools and the teachings in the system as we've learned it, as we teach it to others. And I think it is a helpful exercise, just as an aside here. Learn, practice, get familiar, get acquainted with a style of Reiki that looks different than yours. It's something I try to do at least once a year, once every other year, do something that looks different than what I do. So like in the near future, I'm hoping if everything lines up, I'm going to learn the radiance technique, one of the very first offshoots from Hawaii Takata's form of practice. And, I will compartmentalize and do exactly as they say. And, drink the Kool-Aid when it comes to their version of Reiki history. We know better. We have documents that tell us otherwise, but I will immerse myself in that form of practice to find the common thread. And I've done this with other systems several times over, and I will continue to do it because it is an enrichment thing. So the more malleable the mind is, the more it can engage with those core techniques, those core principles, whether it's the Gokai or hands-on healing. And if we learn it from more than one perspective, it helps us have less attachment to the outer form and be more present with the inner form,
which is actually way to put it.
Formlessness itself.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. Because as soon as we are viewing one versus the other, then we're right back to square one, right? Absolutely. And I love that what you were saying with the precepts there, if we can just return back to the guidance of that. If you think about, for everybody listening, if we just think about reciting them in your head right now, if you're just going through that, well, then where does that automatically put you? That puts you into a softer place. And if you look at somebody, perhaps myself, perhaps yourself, maybe you're having a difficult day right now. We all know people who are just circling through misery, right? And so they're almost doing the antithesis of the precepts, worrying nonstop, being angry nonstop, whatever it might be, right? And so this begats sickness. People can never heal because they're ruminating into that space. And so we have two paths to choose, right? And it starts to then elude this story about how does Reiki heal? What can we cultivate? What stillness can we arrive at? And I love it. It's literally that simple, right?
Exactly. Simple, but not always easy.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Recognize the simple path can be a challenge.
On the simple path, we have to face ourselves, don't we? If we face nothing else, we have to face ourselves.
It's absolutely true.
On that, I want to get to Elaine's question here. And if anybody else has any questions, please do drop them into the chat. We've got let's say about 10 minutes or so here for questions, because we've just been pushing on close to an hour now. But she asks, what about the issue of protection when treating someone? Another question that I answer, or at least I share my thoughts on. I don't want to say that I answer it, but I share my thoughts on this all the time. So I'll turn that over to you. What is your thoughts on the idea of protection when treating someone? And I assume that she is talking about protecting yourself maybe from their energy or so on.
So I like to bear in mind that, again, we do have kind of different Reiki lenses that we're looking through. And if we learn a a form of Reiki that is focused on being an energy intervention. We view Reiki as a type of energy in a sea of many kinds of energies, and we are hoping to achieve a change at this kind of energetic level. Then that opens the door to talk about, well, what about these other kinds? So I understand where this perspective comes from. I was taught through this kind of perspective in the other work, not necessarily related to Reiki, at least not directly, that I do. You know, the idea of protection comes up over and over again. It's a very real thing in a world, especially when you're a sensitive person. But there is a very simple answer about how to protect yourself that comes from my teacher's teacher. This is from Yamaguchi Chiyoko, and Chiyoko sensei taught quite a number of people, but my teacher Arjava said, paraphrasing from her, that the best protection is an open heart. It is from openness, it is from softness, it is from connection that we are the most protected. When we shield, we separate. If we draw a line in the sand, there is a boundary, a barrier, a disconnection, and we are fundamentally orienting ourselves away from that goal of Reiki. That's not to say if you're in heavy spaces, not to take care of your energetic needs, but recognizing that your energetic needs may not be the same thing as Reiki practice. And it is okay to wear more than one hat at one time. But if we really look at what the action and the mechanism of Reiki the system is, Reiki the practice is, and what the phenomenon of Reiki is really about, it's not an energetic thing. And again, a very simple illustration of how we know Reiki is not energy in the classical sense. Like, you know, if we use science to define the word energy, energy is the capacity to do work. It is something that is measurable by some force or another. There are outcomes that we can demonstrate, that we can hopefully repeat. But one of the characteristics of all kinds of measurable energy is that they decrease in effect, or decrease in their ability to do work the greater the distance they travel, or the farther they emanate from their source. And all anyone has to do is learn the second degree and practice distant Reiki to know this is not the case. So Reiki is more phenomenon than it is energy from the lens of physics. And how physics will handle that, we don't know. There are actually a handful of really unique studies that demonstrate that weird things happen even at a distance. We can repeat the results, but physics can't tell you what the source of them is. So if we take a step back from energy and look at phenomenon, if I am practicing Reiki, and Reiki is a passive art, I'm not doing, fixing, healing, manipulate, moving, changing, anything. I'm just being present. Then there's nothing I have to protect myself from, because fundamentally, there's nothing there except Reiki, which is the energy of the heavens, the energy of the earth, the energy of the universe, the energy of the earth. And as Usui said, Uchu waresoku, waresoku uchu, I exist in the universe and the universe exists in me. Everything that's already out that you would want to protect yourself from is inside you. So instead of focusing on the things you want to keep at arm's length, focus on what you want to welcome in. Focus on what you want to welcome out. Focus on the experience of no separation. And it's a very different kind of approach to protection. There's nothing I need to protect myself from in the context of Reiki.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I feel like the impetus usually of these questions are because there's somebody on the table, I'm experiencing this, chills, seeing demonic entities, all manner of things people can experience. And there's no questioning people's own experiences. I mean, nobody can say somebody's experience is right or wrong. That's a moot argument, right? And so I think what you're saying here, and please elaborate on this, is imagine I'm going through this, I'm feeling this. I feel like something is being cleared from somebody. Maybe they're releasing a massive trauma or whatever it might be or whatever, but building on your idea that trauma is already within me, right? Because it's all part of that same energy. It's all part of the universal experience. So if I can still sit with hands-on healing and a silent mind, even while this experience is and it could be a very tangible experience, is taking place, maintaining stillness is maintaining an open heart, and therefore decreasing or hopefully eliminating attachment to a belief of a negative experience, and therefore there is no negative experience.
Yeah, very, very well said. If Reiki is non-duality, there is no polarity of positive and negative.
Right.
There just is,
Right.
period. So if we have attachment to those kinds of polar views, then we will probably do something informed by that. And you are not less than for doing something informed by that. Your practice is not less valid. It's just a different perspective. So these days when I practice Reiki, I prepare my environment. I mean, with the pandemic, I don't really see clients in person, but I still want to prepare the space. When I teach other things, I still want to prepare the space. And I don't do that because I believe there is a fundamental evil in the world that's out to get me, but it's also a respect thing. I respect myself to know what I want in my space. And I also respect other beings well enough that I know what I want to hold space for. And we can use the outer techniques like protection and other tools, but we can also use the inner techniques of oneness. And they get us to very similar end results on the surface. But the mental corridor that you walk down to get there is a very different one.
For me, and I've just reached over when you're talking about holding your space, where I'm seated right now, I do a lot of my own self-practice, and literally sitting right next to me, I have a rock it's a very bizarre experience that I had on Mount Kurama. And the reason I have this next to me, and I'm sharing this with everybody because I hope that this conversation is not coming across as if, the protection or the need for these things is somehow not correct and that stillness is correct. Stillness would be the way we hopefully, I mean, who wouldn't want to be there, right? The reason I have this next to me is because it has a story to it. It has a connection that my mind has given it meaning to Mount Kurama, right on Usui Gongen, where I got this. There's a very special moment when my experiences get really difficult, when I have really difficult self-healings or a difficult, really deep cathartic meditation or whatever it might be, then I reach for this and hold on to it because it gives a respect to the practice. It grounds back into the story, to the connection to Usui Sensei and to my teachers and the lineage and everything and the symbols and everything that comes through that. So is that a form of protection? Maybe, but it helps us arrive at stillness once again. So I can face yet again what I'm trying to go through, which usually has no context. It's just an experience, so meet all of that, I would think, where you are, right? And with your own tools and your own practice. And like you're saying, Nicholas, and I really appreciate that, both avenues are going to converge to stillness at some point anyways.
For sure.
Beautiful.
And I love that you've got a piece of Mount Kurama right there. I actually wear a piece of Mount Kurama. This is a Kuramaishi. It's like the granite that they
Awesome.
famously work at the village at the base of the mountain. So it's one of my most precious things. I get to carry around a whole mountain on my wrist.
It's amazing. What a place. What an incredible place, really. And I'm sure some people listening here live, and maybe those of you who are listening on the recording, I'm sure many of you have experienced it as well. It's an incredible spot. So I just want to open up to any last questions. We have time for one more if anybody wants to throw that in to the comments very quickly. And while we're waiting just for that last question, I'll just put your book back up here again. I can't recommend it enough. Foundations of Reiki Ryoho, Manual of Shoden and Okudan. It's a fantastic work. Do you have any preferred outlet where people might purchase that? Is there any place that you would like to send people?
I always like to say that any book sold is a good book sold. So if you have a local independent bookstore, that is a great place to go support. If we have to live under capitalism, like let's do right by the small guy in capitalism. But you can find it anywhere books are sold. You can go to Amazon and buy it there, bookshop.org, IndieBound. You can visit my publisher's website, innertraditions.com. And then I also, I have some signed copies available too. So I've got like a link I can throw in the chat if anyone's interested, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, that'd be wonderful. And I'll also put that link into the video description when I post it into the group. And do you have a website that you would like to share with everybody? Or is there any place that people can, find more information about you? Maybe share that into the chat here as well. And then maybe also just saying it for people who are not going to see the chat.
Absolutely. So my website is theluminouspearl.com. And then I'm the Luminous Pearl on most things, whether that's Instagram or Facebook or even TikTok, anywhere I can meet the masses to help. And then I do like a free monthly Reiki share every month. I just dropped my link tree in the chat. So it's, linktr.ee/the luminous pearl, and that'll have links to all my upcoming events, signed books, my own personal website, publisher's website, if I'm doing any fun classes. So I do have a free Reiki share coming up later this week, actually tomorrow night Eastern time. And I rotate day of week and time of day each month because I know people live in different time zones. So if the time zone is not convenient where you are, I mix it up every month, and I'll have a link to the next one up pretty soon. And those are just practice spaces. We do a short talk this month because it is literally 100 years ago, March, that Usui had his experience on Mount Kurama.
No.
We'll be talking a little bit about Reiki history tomorrow and paying homage to the founder and his journey. And then we just do some guided practice. I do remote open Reiju, not quite the same as like a formal initiation, but it's a blessing or empowerment ceremony. And then if there's space, we always have some Q&A, and maybe we'll do some other kind of practices. So I mix it up every month. It's like an informal Reiki class. And if donations come through, I pay those forward to charity. It's usually Reiki related charity, but it's not always. So that's just kind of a fun thing I do for the community each month.
Fantastic. And I just wanted to share, if everybody knows that this is the 100th anniversary, if Japan opens up, there will be a pilgrimage that I'm leading to Japan, to Mount Kurama with Hakutan Enomoto Sensei. An amazing experience coming up if they open their borders with COVID. So fingers crossed that this works. So Nicholas, on that, I want to send my heartfelt thanks for this opportunity to talk with you. It's an absolute honor. It's lovely having your book. It's lovely having your presence and having your support in the Usui Reiki Ryoho support and community group. I'm sure everybody listening has benefited tremendously from this chat, as I know I have. And really, it's an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. And thank you for the platform itself. Thank you for the work that you do.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So my friend, be well and in Gashao, and I will talk to you very soon, I'm sure. And thank you to everybody for joining as well. I hope you've enjoyed. Be well, everybody. Take care.